This season's blue chip ratio, dropped by Bud Elliot of CBS Sports this week, proves the Dan Lanning effect is going to bring a championship to Eugene, Oregon. A college football season has all sorts of challenges. Which ones stand out for the Ducks to overcome in the upcoming campaign? Fall camp position previews keep rolling on. We're looking at the tight ends and the safeties today. What time is it? It's Dame time on this edition of That Show Out West.
This place has everything. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
That performance deserves a holy wallawa.
It's a feeling you cannot explain.
This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten.
This program is staged to compete and to win championships.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West. I'm Ted LeBrew. Happy Saturday, everybody. And speaking of the greatest day of the week, we are 6 Saturdays away from Oregon kicking off the 2025 season against the Montana State Bobcats. That is 42 days from today. And 6 Saturdays and 42 days from today will be the regular season debut of that post-game show out west. Really excited to go live on YouTube following Duck games this fall, talking my main thoughts on the game, my initial monologue and commentary, breaking down the box score, some top performers and all of that, and then taking your calls and your immediate emotions and your immediate thoughts, which we all know are obviously the most rational feelings and the most rational thoughts. But I'm really excited to exchange those feelings and thoughts with you during this season. I'm not sure of really any caller or interaction, audience really interaction heavy show within the Oregon community that's out there. So I'm really looking forward to building an audience this fall and talking to all of you following Quack Attack games that we're all so very excited about. We are going to start today's program talking about one of my favorite people outside of my immediate circle, and that being Mr. Dan Lanning. You know, you can nitpick, you can debate, you can talk about some of the things maybe when it comes to Dan. Did he leave some food on the table early in his career against his rivals? Yeah. You can talk about aggressiveness in fourth down type of situations. Okay, you can talk about that. Maybe not exactly being prepared in the big Rose Bowl matchup this year as well. Is he the 6th ranked coach in the country? Is he a 3rd ranked? Is he in the top 5 of head coaches in college football? Where does he stack up in the Big Ten? You can nitpick, you can talk about, you can debate those things, but I think there's one thing specifically that you cannot debate when it comes to Dan Lanning, and it is his ability to be able to build a roster. Dan and Marshall have just been an absolutely chef's kiss of working recruiting, of working the transfer portal, and continue to build great roster after great roster after great roster. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind the Dan Lanning effect has elevated Oregon to new heights where they are consistently talked about. When you talk about the top 5 teams in college football, the top 6, the top 7, whatever, they are in that group. Where now at the beginning of each season, they're kind of just like a given to be in that national championship conversation. Oregon was in a good spot when he got there. He has elevated them to a great and an elite spot. But you maybe don't have to take my word for it. I certainly appreciate it if you do. But I've got some stats to back it up. I've got a very popular data point to be able to back it up, and that being the blue chip ratio from Bud Elliot of CBS Sports. It was dropped earlier in the week, and Oregon is sitting in the top 5 just like they were last season right now. Now, if you don't know what the blue chip ratio is, I'm going to quickly explain it to you for those of you that don't. It is a percentage of a team's recruits that are 4-star or 5-star prospects over the last 4 cycles. You bring in good players equal good teams, and good teams equal teams that can lift the trophy, certainly at the end of the season. as it pertains to this season here in 2025, Alabama and Ohio State lead the way at 89%. Those are some pretty good measures. Ohio State last year was at something crazy like 94%. Yeah, there's probably a good reason why they won the national championship. Georgia is sitting there at 84% this year. Texas A&M at 82% this year. And there we go. Number 5 is the Oregon Ducks. They have the same blue chip ratio as a lot of people's national championship favorite in the Texas Longhorns. They're 10 percentage points ahead of Penn State, which is a lot of people's pick to win the Big Ten and maybe be the team to win the national championship for the third consecutive year from the Big Ten Conference. So Oregon is sitting in a really good situation considering this team is really young. There's some new pieces on this team. There was a lot of high draft picks, 10 total draft picks for this Ducks team last year. You had guys like Derek Harmon drafted in the first round. Jamari Caldwell was drafted up there. Terrence Ferguson was drafted up there. Jeffrey Bassa was drafted. Dylan Gabriel was drafted. All of those types of guys are gone. And yet, this is an Oregon team that just reloads, and talent-wise, they are in a good position. Now, really what the metric, it really starts at 50% and goes up. That's kind of the baseline of what Bud really believes within this metric is what a team really needs to be at to win a championship. Now, have there been teams in the 50 percentile that have won? Yeah, Michigan a couple of years ago. You had Clemson back in the 2010s that won one as well. And this is only a part of the measure. Bud said this, and I certainly really back that up as well. Okay, you need great development and you need great coaching, right? So talent is just a piece of the pie, but talent provides a high floor. You need to have a little bit of a head start, and then to be able, because if you have that high floor, you can certainly equal a high ceiling with the same development as maybe some other players on other teams and other rosters as well. So it's extremely important to have the most talented players in the country. The most talented players equal the most talented teams, and those are the teams that are contending for the national championship. So let's talk about that aforementioned Lanning effect right now. The Dan Lanning effect has them at this level in college football, at that 78 percentile right now, because when you look at the blue chip ratio, it isn't even close where Oregon is at right now and where they've been at any other era in any years past. Like, I thought Mario Cristobal did a pretty good job in terms of raising the recruiting profile, getting better within the trenches, and really maybe expanding to other areas where Oregon needed to get better at. And he did a pretty good job of that. But here's the thing with Mario Cristobal. Only one Mario Cristobal team had above a 55% blue chip ratio. I want to just throw out some numbers for you, and this will really be a great example of the trajectory and one of the great examples of the Lanning effect right now that has them where they have them. 2019 and 2020, they were below the 50 percentile. They weren't even on the map. They weren't even on the map in like the top 20, top 30 programs in terms of talent on their roster. 2021, they cracked it 56%. That was 12th in the country. Fast forward to 2022, Dan Lanning takes over. Now they're up to 60. That's 11th in the country. You have a sprinkling, certainly, of some Mario Cristobal players, but the more time goes by, the less Mario Cristobal players, the less of the Mario effect you have, and the more of the Lanning effect that you have. 2023, 67% blue chip ratio. That was 9th in the country. Last season, they jumped all the way up 9 percentage points to 76%. That was 5th in the country. And this year, they're sitting there at 78%. So you see that mapped out? It's an incremental climb. Since Lanning has taken over as the head coach of the Ducks, Oregon has increased their blue chip ratio by over 20%. I did not quite have enough time to maybe dive into this as much as I would have liked to, but I would love to see like the first 4 years of any coach within the blue chip ratio era in which Bud has been doing this. Has there been another head coach that has increased the blue chip ratio every single year? It's never gone down under Lanning. And have they increased it by 20 percentage points within 4 years? I'd be very curious. But that is the first part, certainly, of the Dan Lanning effect right there. And here's the second part of the Dan Lanning effect. And we're going to get some more percentage points at you. We're going to get some more data points at you right here to really hit home exactly what's going on right now. I think the Ducks are hitting their talent acquisition prime, but possibly haven't reached their peak. Let's break down blue chip guys in each recruiting class. Now, that was the teams. This is the recruiting class specifically, one class that was 4 cycles. 2023, 60% of the guys were blue chip guys. 2024, 70% of the guys were blue chip guys. And then you take the big 24% jump last year, 94% of guys within that class were blue chip 4-star or 5-star guys. Only Dimitri Manning was a 3-star. You fast forward to this year, you're sitting up there at 87% are 4-star guys, or they are 5-star guys. I believe it's Kaloy Kelly and Dutch Horace out of St. John Bosco, the edge rusher, are the only 3-star guys according to the industry right now in this class. And the turn really started with the 2025 class. Why is that important? I think that was the point where people were really starting to see what Dan Lanning was doing, right? It was a couple of years removed from Mario Cristobal, and people kind of saw the winning trajectory certainly take a step up, and they really saw what exactly the culture he was building and what type of football team he was building. They were really getting a good idea of what a Lanning-era Ducks team is really all about. I don't know where the peak is going to be. Okay, is this going to be a program that's going to churn out Nick Saban? We talk about the Nick Saban effect, right? Where they're like the number one recruiting class a bunch of years straight, or they're a lock for the top 3 or the top 2 every single year. Are they going to be at that Kirby Smart in Georgia level? Because I think right now they're a team that has back-to-back top 5 recruiting classes. We know Dan Lanning always really pulls off really good summers. He pulls off flips really near signing day, but there is still more, I think, to be achieved consistently when it comes to bringing in this type of high school talent, which we know is the lifeblood to any college football program. So that's kind of exciting. It's exciting. Now, this might be just where Oregon lives. They might live in the top 5 from like number 4 through number 8, and maybe they can't quite crack that to get up to number 1. I think eventually they could get to that area, but it certainly is exciting, that unknown that possibly the Ducks haven't reached their peak under Lanning. That right there is another aspect of the Lanning effect. Just how many guys in a singular class, these last 2 classes, are elite level players. Right now, Oregon has easily the number 1 average recruit ranking in all of college football within the 2026 class. Quality players, maybe over the quantity of players right now. You know, bringing in talent, it's just one part of the equation. It's one part of it. What's maybe the most important part of talent acquisition now? It's keeping it on your campus. It's keeping it on your roster, with a lot of money being floated around and tampering basically being legal. Well, not basically, it is legal, and transfer portal and how easy it is to change schools. Retention is more difficult than it has ever been. But yet here we are, once again, to another aspect and another layer of the Dan Lanning effect. Here we are talking about Oregon maybe retaining as much quality talent as anybody. We talked about the talent that they brought in. If you're a starter at Oregon, you just don't leave. Like, that's a very popular stat that's thrown out there. Since the 2023 class, Oregon has retained 77% of their blue chip prospects. And here are some of the ones that have left. Roderick Pleasant, Dante Dowdle, Johnny Bowens, he transferred to UTSA. Ashton Cozart has like 1 catch in his career. He went to SMU. Cole Martin, unfortunately, was injured at Arizona State this past season. Tyler Turner transferred to Baylor. Ryan Pelham got kicked off the team. Jaquan McRoy. They have lost 8 of their 34 prospects in Dan Lanning's classes. Okay? And 3 of them have transferred to Power 2 schools. I mentioned McRoy, he transferred to Arkansas. I mentioned Roderick Pleasant, he transferred over to UCLA. Dante Dowdell, he transferred to Nebraska. I believe he is at Kentucky right now. So when people are at Oregon, they don't use it to go to another big-time program. That is the big-time program. And once again, folks, that is the Lanning effect. No, you need to keep on raising and you need to keep on upping that money every single year to be able to keep these great recruiting classes in place so you can see 2 years, so you can see 3 years of Duck development and then see them go off and enjoy some really good National Football League's career. Folks, I think it's when, not if, that the Oregon Ducks are going to bring home a championship because of everything that I just laid out right now. I think a big aspect to this as well, as why it's when and not if, is Lanning's long-term commitment. It is, Urban Meyer recently said it on the triple option. He's like, dude, this guy's bought in. This guy's bought in. You never worried about Nick Saban leaving for another job. You never worry about Kirby Smart leaving for another job. And now you're not really worrying about Dan Lanning leaving for another job. So you know that there is that stability in place, that this is going to be a program that's just going to constantly reload and reload and reload and have this type of elite talent and these type of blue chip ratio every single year. Folks, if your talent level is that high and it keeps on increasing like Dan has been able to do, you got to use the word when and not the word if. The Dan Lanning effect. I think the math checks out. We know football is an emotional game, not just for the players, the coaches, the personnel on some of these squads, but certainly, and maybe even more so, for the fans. It is a roller coaster following the Oregon Ducks every single week, but we love that emotion. We love that shifting of our feelings every single week. I think is what keeps us coming back, certainly on game days, throughout a season, throughout this roller coaster ride. There are bumps in the road, there are obstacles, there are challenges. I'm going to talk about now the 4 challenges that I perceive to be the biggest facing Duck football this upcoming season. Leave your biggest challenges in the comments below for those of you watching on YouTube. Let's dive right into it. First one, continue, that's the key word there, continue to avoid trip-ups. I say continue is the key word because Dan Lanning has done a really good job of beating all of the teams that he should beat when it comes to those types of football games. Dan Lanning has never lost to an unranked team. He has never lost. He has never really suffered that upset. When it comes to remaining focused, when they got the target on their back and you got a team that's 500 or below 500 and really has nothing to lose, Oregon remains laser focused in those types of situations. 2022, their losses came to number 3 Georgia, number 25 Washington, and number 21 Oregon State. They also had 3 ranked wins that year. Oregon under Lanning has more ranked wins than they do ranked losses. In 2023, they lost to Washington twice when they were in the top 10, both times, and then of course last year to Ohio State in the college football playoff when they were sitting there at number 6. Now, what do we know about this year's team? It's the main point. I hit at home a lot. A lot of national people kind of hit at home a lot. It's a younger team. There's a good amount of turnover, and sometimes when you have that younger team, they can be a little bit easy for me to say vulnerable in some of these games and in some of these spots. So this coaching staff has to be able to have these guys ready to go, specifically early in the season. Now, I look at early in the season versus later in the season. I actually think later in the season maybe faces more possibilities, I guess you might say, of trip-ups. You look at early in the season, you have an FCS game at home, you have Oregon State at home, you have Oklahoma State at home. Really the only road game in that stretch before they play the Penn State Nittany Lions, it is the only road game during that stretch, is when you're going to go on the road to Northwestern, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten last year, and they play in a soccer stadium on the banks of Lake Michigan. So it's certainly not a hostile environment. I think that is very favorable for the young players on this Oregon team to be able to, hey, maybe make a few mistakes, but to be able to correct them where the mistakes that they make it's not going to be in a one-possession game. So it's not going to be a game-determining mistake. And they're going to have such a talent advantage that I think that is going to be able to work itself out so that they're playing good football before Penn State. I've said that many times so far, certainly on this program. But the Ducks played 5 of the 6 worst teams in the Big Ten with the worst records last season. That being Purdue, Maryland, Wisconsin, UCLA, and Michigan State. Purdue, Maryland, UCLA, and Michigan State not on the schedule this season. So I think overall as a whole, okay, maybe there's a little bit of higher level of competition that they're facing within the Big Ten slate this season. 7 of the 9 Big Ten opponents for the Ducks this season made a bowl game. So maybe some of those teams will improve. Maybe some of those teams will certainly take a dip down. But I think overall, I think you're playing more teams in the middle, whereas last year you certainly played some teams towards the bottom of the Big Ten as well. Rutgers on the road in October as well. That has maybe a road rock fight similar to maybe Wisconsin like last year. Iowa is another example of that. We'll talk more about that as the segment goes along. Minnesota, USC, Washington. Of course, that month of November, it's not the easiest month of November. Now, I look at all of those opponents. Oregon has either a more talented roster or a much more talented roster in all of those games. And I think when this young talent gets 8, 9, 10 games under their belt, they're going to be a little bit more comfortable. They're going to be a little bit better. But with this type of roster, really kind of for the first time in the Lanning era, they got to certainly be on their P's and Q's where they do not get tripped up. Wisconsin, it came close last season, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. A challenge for them with this young roster is going to be avoiding that upset. I believe that they are going to do it, but that doesn't mean it still won't be a challenge. Let's move on to the next thing, and these are about specific opponents. A challenge for Oregon's defense, specifically the defensive line, is going to be containing Penn State's run game. It's a challenge, and we know it's going to be a challenge because it was a challenge last year, a challenge that the Ducks did not necessarily live up to in the Big Ten championship game. Penn State rushed for 297 yards in Indianapolis. The Nittany Lions returned 3 starters on that offensive line. So this is going to be, and they returned Nicholas Singleton, and they returned Katron Allen. So their run game is back. And they got an offseason under their belt, and they got a lot of motivation really certainly coming their way. But they've also got a lot of expectations in Happy Valley as there. Look, it's difficult enough just playing in that night whiteout atmosphere that's going to be taking place in late September. But this is going to be a big test to see exactly where the defensive line is. The defensive line lost a first-round draft pick in Derek Harmon. They lost a third-round draft pick in Jamari Caldwell. So when we talk about the returners and what's coming back and the confidence for Penn State in the run game, you do lose some interior bodies up front. Now, I've talked about how much I like the size and the measurables and what's going to be in the middle of this defensive line, but this is going to be their first big challenge. This is going to be their first big test. I think it's a potential to make a statement that if they contain this run game, that this Oregon defensive line is for real. A lot of people out there have Oregon as a top 10 defense in college football. I think a big reason for that, okay, is what is up front on the defensive line. So this is going to be their proving ground to see if exactly they are what maybe these early rankings, these off-season rankings say they are. It's probably going to be the best run game in all of college football. And it's going to be the most difficult environment and loudest maybe environment in all of college football. So that is certainly going to be a big challenge. Like early peak looking at that game, I think it's about what Penn State wants to do, physicality, leaning on Oregon. Because, man, if they can control the time of possession, they keep Dante Moore in the explosiveness on the sideline. That certainly favors the Nittany Lions, especially with that crowd. But if Oregon, they're going to want to hit explosive plays because I think they'll potentially have the advantage on the outside with their receivers against Penn State's secondary in that specific matchup. So Oregon's going to look to hit big explosive plays. Penn State going to look to maybe lean on you, dominate the time of possession. A clash of styles, styles make fights. Now, that's about defending the run game, and kind of defense heavy, certainly, right now. But let's talk about the pass game. I think a challenge for Oregon is keeping Indiana's and USC's pass games in check, respectively. That IU game is in a very interesting spot because you have the Penn State game, and then you have a bye, and then you have Indiana coming into Eugene at Autzen Stadium. Now, you'd either beat Penn State, you got everybody an extra week telling you how great you are, and then you got a pretty decent Indiana team coming into your place. Or you lose to Penn State, you got to think about that certainly for an extra week, and then you got a good Hoosier passing attack coming in as well. Now, they lose their quarterback in Curtis Rourke, but secret might be they might upgrade at that position. Fernando Mendoza transfers in from Cal, passed for over 3,000 yards last season. I think he's got a higher floor to start with in this offense than we saw last year. I thought Curtis Rourke was a beneficiary of being in this Kurt Cignetti, Mike Shanahan as their offensive coordinator, being in this offense. And you look at the weapons that Mendoza is going to have to throw to. They returned their top 2 wide receivers from last year. Elijah Surratt, 957 yards and 8 scores. Omar Cooper, 594 yards and 7 touchdowns. Mekhi Jackson transfers in from App State. He had 745 yards and 5 touchdowns. So after that, maybe the depth kind of thins out a little bit, but Indiana was certainly able to find guys last season, and they've got a lot of confidence. I think that if there's one thing Indiana doesn't lack, it's confidence with Kurt Cignetti certainly running the show at the top of this program. But this is going to be kind of like a early midseason. I don't know how much of a test against the passing game Penn State is going to be in the games before Penn State. So when I specifically look at the secondary and their ability to cover and especially limit some big plays down the field, this Indiana game is really the first one that certainly comes to mind. Later in the season, of course, you've got the USC game as well. You've got USC probably has one of the top wide receiver tandems in all of college football. Everybody's really high in Mekhi Lemon. I think Jacoby Lane might be a better wide receiver than Mekhi Lemon. Can certainly go up and make some big-time plays with that long frame. Is Jaden Mayava a quarterback that's going to commit less turnovers this year? We saw what he can do when he doesn't give the ball to the other team. But that's one where late in the season, how far has the Oregon secondary come at that point in time? But those are the 2 passing attacks that really stand out to me as challenges on this Oregon schedule this year. And, growing up in Wisconsin, now living in Minnesota, I know all about how Iowa wants to play the game of football. And this kind of is reminiscent of Oregon's game against Wisconsin last year where they got into that rock fight. Maybe the Badgers dragged them down a little bit and pulled them down to how they want to play. I think a challenge going on the road to Iowa City. I believe that's the first week of November. You cannot allow Iowa to drag you down to their level. Now, I will say this about the Hawkeyes. They're going to have the best quarterback that they've had since 2019, likely have the best offense that they've had since 2019, even though they had a 1,500-yard rusher last season in Caleb Johnson, but Caleb Johnson is no longer there. Like in that game, if I'm Oregon, let's fire it downfield. Let's get explosive because Iowa, if there's one thing Iowa can't do, it's play in a track meet. It's play with speed. It's playing with explosiveness. It's going back and forth because that's what Iowa does. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to watch, even if you're not a fan of the team that Iowa is playing against. It's frustrating when you're a fan of good football, right? When it's about ugly, it's about punting, it's about creating turnovers, it's about winning 16-13 in defensive football and special teams type of football. They just play a different style of game. Oregon, a challenge for them is not going to be baited into playing Iowa's style of football for that specific game because that's the game a lot of people have circled. Hey, potential upset on the road. Kinnick is a place in the past where good Big Ten, highly ranked Big Ten teams have gone to die. For Oregon, man, you've got to play your game. You got, hey, we're going to play on the perimeter. We're not going to play grounded pound. We're not going to play a punt game back and forth. We're going to play our game. We're going to make this explosive. And to keep up with us, you got to be able to score with us, Iowa. So Oregon just can't get drugged down into that type of game, because that's exactly how Iowa pulls off these games, because they know that they can't out-athlete you. So you have to show your speed, your skill, your athleticism on the perimeter, really on both sides of the football during that game. Man, just talking about ball, talking about run game and defensive line and coverages and passing attacks, man, it's got me really, really excited about this upcoming season. Ladies and gentlemen, we are close to the end. Just one more group of fall camp position previews following this pair right here, right now on this very program. How about we start with the offensive side of the football for a change? Let's begin talking about the tight end position. You know, it's kind of funny. These last handful of years with Terrence Ferguson have been like a top 3 career ever in the history of Oregon Duck football when we're talking about tight ends in the history of this program. But yet, when we talk about the tight end position for this season, we're talking about a guy in Kenyon Sadiq that could take it to an absolutely new level. His athleticism, his versatility. People are saying he could be a first-round NFL draft pick. And then you look at the future. There's a 5-star committed in the 2026 class, Kendre Harrison. I've mentioned him a couple of times. I've talked about the golden age of wide receivers for Oregon football. Man, we might be living in a golden age of Oregon tight ends, certainly right now, where you could see NFL draft pick after NFL draft pick after NFL draft pick. Yeah, there's no doubt that Drew Maringer, he's got some toys to play with. I'm sure he's having a lot of fun coaching these guys up, certainly right now. Let's talk about the aforementioned Terrence Ferguson. The great career that he was able to put up during his time here at Oregon. 591 yards and 3 touchdowns last season. He was a second-round draft pick of the Los Angeles Rams. So that's what's gone. Right, that's a great career that you've got to replace. But now let's talk about the additions. Oregon needed some depth in this tight end room. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. They got Jamari Johnson transferring in from Louisville. He played in 7 games before getting hurt. Last year, 13 catches, 158 yards, and a score. He was on the 24/7 Sports All Freaks list coming out of high school. Kid can move, and his frame. 6'5", 265 pounds. And then they get a 4-star true freshman in Vander Plug as well. So where does that leave the tight end room? This is where it leaves the tight end room. Of course, Kenyon Sadiq, the true junior, is going to be at the top of this list. Jamari Johnson, he is a redshirt sophomore. Roger Salapaga is a true sophomore. Zach Grace is a redshirt sophomore. Vander Plug is a true freshman. And A.J. Pugliano is a redshirt freshman. All right, folks, I've talked about this guy a good amount, maybe not for a little bit. I think that we had a streak going of 2 or 3 shows in a row where we were talking about Kenyon Sadiq. But let's talk about Kenyon Sadiq a little bit more. How high of a level can he take it to? There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of anticipation for him. But I think that now there's increased expectations because of the injury of Evan Stewart. I think there was already a lot of expectations that he was going to be certainly a big-time threat in this offense. Now he's really the number 2 threat. And I think on a maybe a decent amount of passing concepts, he could even maybe be the number 1 threat that they throw to. I think he's like the number 1 weapon when you really factor in. I know you got a guy out there in Decorian Moore, but he hasn't played a game of college football yet. We've seen on a college football field, maybe in smaller doses, what Kenyon Sadiq can truly do. I think the thing that I really love about Kenyon is just his versatility and just how much that he can do from the tight end position. Everybody's going to look at the hurdle during the Big Ten championship game. Everybody's going to look at the 2 touchdown catches during the Big Ten championship game, and that's great. And that's outstanding. I mean, Kenyon Sadiq last year, 308 yards and 2 touchdowns. But when you talk about versatility, you also got to talk about blocking. When you talk about a tight end, his PFF blocking grades are really, really high, whether it's from the traditional tight end position, blocking in the run game, or whether it's blocking out on the perimeter. He is an asset. He is an asset, and you don't get that a lot of times from some of these athletic and these pass-catching tight ends, and that is a very key part in what his game really involves as well. And when I talk about versatility, I think that they are going to line him up all over the place. Early in his career, we saw him get involved in the run game. I think we'll see. I should say we'll see whether we see that, how much we see that, because Oregon certainly got a very deep run game as well. But when I talk about versatility, I talk about lining up at different spots in terms of the end line tight end, lining up in the slot, lining up out wide. You saw Terrence Ferguson line up in the slot last year. Kenyon Sadiq certainly did a little bit as well. And then I talked about the injury to Evan Stewart a little bit more. Whereas I think what happens outside of Corey and Moore in the wide receiver room is going to depend on maybe how much we see Kenyon Sadiq out on the perimeter a little bit. But he's just a matchup nightmare. Like if he's matched up against a smaller defensive back, his size can be, and his strength can be a big-time advantage. According to some of his coaches, he put on extra pounds of muscle while still maintaining the speed, while still maintaining the agility, and that should absolutely be frightening to opposing defenses. You match him up against a bigger guy, or against like a linebacker or a safety or somebody like that, he's got enough explosiveness and speed to be able to outrun him. And get open that way. So he can really get open in any way that he wants to. We've seen somebody like a Brock Bowers recently at Georgia have a tremendous impact from the tight end position. I think Kenyon Sadiq can make that type of impact as well in a more dynamic offense at Oregon. They say the tight end position is the quarterback's best friend. Well, you best believe that Dante is going to be looking maybe to his best buddy out there, Kenyon Sadiq, a good amount of time as well. Like there's so much that I could talk about Kenyon, and I'm so excited about what he can do. I'm so optimistic that he can truly be a great weapon, and I think him stepping up as that significant weapon alongside DeCorey and Moore puts maybe less pressure on some of these other wide receivers to step up and be like an 800-yard guy or a 900-yard guy, because I think there's a possibility that Kenyon Sadiq could certainly be that type of guy, more involved within this passing offense. Let's talk about Jamari Johnson for a little bit. I talked about his size, I talked about his frame, I talked about where he's coming from, but when people talk about these transfer additions this year, they talk about Dylan Thieneman, they talk about Mekhi Hughes, they talk about Bear Alexander, they talk about Isaiah World. Not a lot of people are going to be talking about Jamari Johnson because he's technically not a starter. But I think if you do see Sadiq line up out wide a little bit more, and then you see Jamari Johnson at the typical tight end role, I think that's something that could happen if this staff has a lot of confidence in Jamari Johnson right now, that he can play that significant of a role. I think his size allows him to be a weapon in special situations, specifically down by the red zone, right? When you have that type of size, throw the ball up to somebody, they're going to come down, certainly with the football in that type of situation. So I think he's one of the more underrated transfer additions that they've brought in this season. I think that he's going to surprise some people, maybe how involved that he's going to be within this offense, because people are so focused on Kenyon Sadiq, and they should be focused on Kenyon Sadiq. But I think the Oregon staff, they're gonna try their damnedest, I think, to get Jamari Johnson on the field, especially in situations where his size can be utilized. Let's talk about the depth a little bit, because when we talk about fall camp, we talk about battles. I think there's going to be a little bit of a battle for tight end 3, even though I believe Roger Salapaga is probably the leader in the clubhouse, certainly right now. When you look at Roger Salapaga, he played 11 games before an injury last season, played a majority of those snaps on special teams, including recovering that crucial onside kick in the October win against the Ohio State Buckeyes. But this is going to be the battle. Roger Salapaga is going to be in it. Zach Grace is interesting. because this is a guy, he wore the same number as Tatum Tuioti. I believe the broadcasters in the Big Ten Championship thought it was Tatum Tuioti kind of lined up in the backfield there, but he appeared in 10 games last year. 20 of the 41 snaps were as a fullback. So when it gets to those big packages down by the goal line, he's that H-back. He's that fullback type of guy that they really bring in. And he was pretty effective, I think, last season. But can he battle with Sailapaga a little bit more to provide more depth in this tight end room? I think that's a big question. But then you get beyond that. Vander Ploeg is kind of like a taller, maybe a smaller frame, if you want to put it that way, compared to some of these other guys in this room. Pass-catching type of guy out there. Is he going to be in the battle? I'm not sure. I think it's probably going to be between Zach Grace and Roger Sailapaga for who really slides into a tight end 3 depth type of role. But I have a lot of optimism for what Vander can do in the future, certainly at Oregon. And as I said, AJ Pugliano is certainly in that role as well. But here's the thing when it comes to the whole tight end 3 deal. How good is Roger Sailapaga going to be coming off of an injury? And like, how much can you rely on some of these guys past Sadiq, past Johnson? If one of those guys goes down, I think there's going to be some depth concerns. Okay, that's the way I believe it, unless we see something different within fall camp. But I think once you get beyond, I think there's a lot of exciting things that you can say about those two guys, but once you get beyond those two guys, I think the talent starts to drop off a little bit. But we'll see if these guys can certainly rise up. You know, tight end 3 is not something that you're going to be using a ton within this Oregon offense. So, but you certainly would like a little bit more depth at that position. But I think each one of these guys, when you go tight end 3, tight end 4, and when you kind of go down the list, I think provides us something a little bit different. So there is some versatility. There is some variety as far as that concerned. But this is a group, especially those top 2, that got to stay healthy the entire year, I think, for this room to possibly succeed at the level that they wanted to this season. Excited, very, very excited about what this tight end room can be this year. To finish things off, let's flip over to the defensive side of the football. Let's talk about the safeties on the back end of this Ducks defense. You know, the last couple of years, there have been incremental improvements, maybe smaller improvements, but if that Rose Bowl on January 1st proved us anything, it proved that this safety room got a long way to go to be considered great, got a long way to go to be considered elite, to be able to go toe-to-toe with some of the best passing attacks in college football. That's what not only the Rose Bowl really has taught us, but the last 2 years has taught us, is when Oregon has gone head-to-head with some of these great receivers and these great passing attacks. Some of these guys on the back end, they've gotten turned around, especially in the Rose Bowl. They got turned around. Now, in their defense, a lot of people in that situation would have gotten turned around against Jeremiah Smith on that day in Pasadena, and Emeka Ibuka and Carnell Tate and all those guys. It was just a perfect storm on that specific day, but it certainly did shine a spotlight. And I think 2 years ago's performance, that certainly did shine a spotlight. Is like, we need to get better in the defensive backfield. We need to get better at safety. We need to get better at the last line of defense. And as I'm going to highlight throughout this position preview, I believe that the safety room is as good as it's been during the Dan Lanning era. It's as good as it's been in a hot minute in Eugene, Oregon, and that provides a sense of optimism when the Ducks face off against some of these better passing attacks within this 2025 season. Now, they lost both of their starting safeties from last season. Kobe Savage was in there. It was his last year of eligibility coming over from Kansas State. Tysheem Johnson is gone as well. He runs out of eligibility. Both those guys were number 2 and number 3 tacklers on this team. So you're losing guys that could certainly come up in the play and make some stops. Tyler Turner was in the recruiting class a couple of years back. He ends up entering the portal, and he transfers out to Baylor. Now, who comes into this program? Of course, the big addition, Dylan Thieneman from Purdue. But we'll talk more about him and in more detail here in just a little bit. But I think it's been well documented just how big of an addition he is to the safety room. And then true freshman 5-star Trey McNutt. Those are some a couple of pretty good additions, certainly at the safety position. So all of that being considered, what does this room look like? You've got Dylan Thieneman, the true junior. Kingston Lopa is a redshirt freshman. Aaron Flowers is a redshirt freshman. Peyton Woodyard is a sophomore. Trey McNutt is a true freshman, and Cruz Rushing, the brother of Elijah Rushing, rounds things off as a redshirt freshman. Of course, the key when you talk about the safeties this year, it's Dylan Thieneman. It's Dylan Thieneman. I mean, just what this guy has done in 2 years at Purdue has been outstanding. Back-to-back seasons with over 100 tackles. He was a third-team All-American, not a freshman All-American. He was first team, certainly, when it came to that, but a third-team All-American across the board when it comes to his freshman season. He also had 6 interceptions that year. He's been an All-Big Ten player as well. He's highly regarded as maybe a future first-round NFL safety. Outside of Caleb Downs, he might be the best safety in all of college football. This is a huge addition, right? We set this thing up talking about how the Ducks have bowed out the last 2 seasons. Getting a guy at that talent level was extremely important, I think, for this Ducks secondary. And I think one thing, we talked about his talent and what exactly it can do. And Purdue really leaned on him to do a lot. And we'll talk maybe more about what Oregon is going to expect him or maybe not expect him to do in just a minute. But his leadership, I think, is going to be paramount. We're going to be talking about the youth here in just a minute. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see, and I said it already, obviously for those on podcast as well, all of the youth within the rest of the room. Like, there are guys that have not started at safety. There are guys that haven't played a ton of games at the college level. And you hear Dylan Thieneman, and I mean, he's coming in there. He's the first one there. He's the last one to leave. And you have guys during these spring press conferences that are saying he's showing us what it truly means to be a professional, how to prepare, how to approach the day, how to be a great player, how to get the most out of your talent. Having a guy like that in that room with these younger players, I believe, is going to pay a lot of dividends, especially when we get to the second half of the year, when some of these guys kind of get their feet solid within the spots that they're going to be in. But, yeah, I think, the talent is obviously outstanding, but having the leadership and setting the example, it's been something that's been talked about, and I think it's going to play a huge role, especially with this younger talent within this room as well for Dylan Thieneman. And it's funny because Purdue, he did everything. He did everything. A lot of times he was essentially another linebacker, but I think playing around much better talent and being in a much better defense, we're going to truly see Dylan Thieneman, the safety. I think Tosh is going to, I know I preface this by saying, hey, the leading tackler or the second leading tackler and third leading tackler last year were safeties, but they had nowhere near 100 tackles. Nowhere near 100 tackles. I think Tosh and Chris Hampton and the defensive coaching staff is going to say, hey, we need you to be great in the deep third. That's where we need you to be great. Yes, we certainly want you to come up and do what you do in terms of playing the run, taking great angles and making those types of tackles up, near the first 2 levels of the defense. But I think the important thing for Thieneman this year is he needs to be that last line of defense that where this Oregon team just does not get beat deep consistently. He needs to be that reliable presence this year for Oregon. He said it in an interview, I believe it was Ducks of a Feather, or maybe it was his press conference, I can't remember, but it's a very different scheme. And with that, I think there's going to be very different expectations for Dylan Thieneman at safety. But having seen him the last couple of years following the Big Ten, this is a big-time addition, especially considering where Oregon was at talent-wise the last couple of years and the results that they've had thus the last couple of years as well. And fall camp battles. We've been talking about it here for the last couple of weeks. This is, I think, maybe one of the bigger battles of fall camp. Who is going to be the other starting safety beside Dylan Thieneman? And the names on this list, most of them, I think there's 4 that are going to be battling out here. I think it's going to be Kingston Lopa, Aaron Flowers, Peyton Woodyard, and Trey McNutt. Right now, I tend to favor Kingston Lopa. This staff put some trust in Lopa during the Big Ten championship game when he was asked to go out there in situations to be able to match up against Tyler Warren. We know the size that is Tyler Warren and the weapon that he was. Lopa at 6'5", 190 pounds. I think it was like 7 defensive snaps last year in that game, but he did a good job in that game. Tyler Warren, it was the run game, it was other parts. Warren didn't have an absolutely gigantic game in the Big Ten championship game. So a little bit of credit certainly is to be given to Lopa, but his height, his length, he is probably the leader in the clubhouse, certainly right now. I think a lot of people are really giving off that vibe within the building right now. Aaron Flowers, you saw him lay the lumber a little bit a couple of times during that spring game. I'm excited about what he can be, certainly as a tackler and coming up and really making an impact with his shoulders and all of that. Peyton Woodyard, I wasn't as impressed with during the spring game, but it's a spring game. It's just one smaller sample size as well. But here's the thing about Woodyard. He played in all 14 games last year. No, mostly special teams, but did play 58 snaps on the defensive side of the football. And then you got to factor in freshman Trey McNutt. I've said before, it's going to be hard to keep Naeem Offord and Trey McNutt off of the football field this year. That is going to be a extremely fun battle to be able to follow, I think, during fall camp. And you could realistically... You could probably talk me into some might be more of a reach than others. Let me just put it that way. But there might be parts of each player's game where you could talk me into that player winning this battle and being the starter. I think there's good depth in this room. I think there's really good talent in this room. But once again, we circle back to the youth. How fast are these guys going to grow up? Which leads me to my last point. This position absolutely cannot be a liability. And that's kind of been an overarching point as I've done this position preview with the safeties right now. Thieneman is as good of a player as they've had in a long time. I've mentioned that. But just how fast are these young guys going to grow up? Is that other safety spot going to be a weak point in the defense? Or are these redshirt freshmen, or are these young players, as this season goes along, are they going to step up and mature into this role? And truly we're going to see just how much more talented these guys are than some of these other plug-and-play guys that we've seen the last couple of years. This needs to be a part of the defense that cannot be beat in some of the biggest situations against the pass this season. I have confidence that they're going to be better, but especially with the young players, they need to go out and prove it. This is an all-new group. It's an all-new group that can be exciting. That can also be a little bit concerning because it is a little bit of an unknown. But either way, I think we're going to see some improvement this year at the safety position. Another great edition of TSOW is in the books. One more group of position previews. I think we're talking offensive line and linebacker coming up here on a future edition of That Show Out West. So until that edition of TSOW, I want to thank you for tuning in today. I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.